The year is 75 million years ago. You wake up, you're a dinosaur, your skull weighs about 15 pounds, and that's just the bone on top of your head because evolution decided you needed a built-in crash helmet. You spent yesterday slamming your face into another guy's face just to prove a point, and today you're probably gonna do it again, because why not? Meanwhile, in another time, another place, you're a deer. You wake up and your antlers span 12 feet across, which is wider than most rooms in a modern house. You try to walk through some trees, and there is a little problem. Over the course of Earth's history, evolution has produced some truly remarkable creatures. And by remarkable, I mean creatures that went extinct for reasons so preventable, so avoidable, so genuinely stupid that you would have to wonder if natural selection was just seeing what it could get away with. This is not about asteroids or ice ages. This is about animals that basically killed themselves by accident through having the dumbest decisions that seemed fine at the time. Like, imagine spending millions of years perfecting a perfect defense system, and then humans show up and then just flip you over and eat you. Or evolving the biggest eyes in history and still not seeing your own extinction coming. Or being the largest ape that ever lived and starving to death because you were too picky. These creatures did not lose to predators. They lost themselves out of pure stupidity. So, you wake up one morning and you're a deer. That's already not great, but it gets worse because your antlers span 12 feet across, which is wider than the average parking space. And they weigh about 80 pounds. Yes, 80 pounds of bone on your head just sitting there. This is Megaloceros, and honestly it had a pretty good run for a while. We're talking about the largest deer that ever lived, standing 7 feet tall at the shoulder, which sounds impressive until you remember that most of its height budget went into growing a hat that doubled as a structural liability. These antlers weren't just big, they were wide and flat, almost like someone took a moose rack and said, what if we made this everyone's problem? And the thing is, for thousands of years during the Ice Age, this actually worked. The landscape was open grassland. It was basically flat, empty space where you could walk around with your 12-foot antenna array without hitting anything. Males would use these antlers to show off to females, and apparently it worked really well because females kept picking the guys with the biggest racks, which meant evolution just kept dialing up the size. Bigger guy, bigger rack. Classic sexual selection, except nobody thought about what happens when the ecosystem changes, because then the Ice Age ended. Forests started growing back, and here's where Megaloceros ran into a problem that should have been obvious from day one, which is that trees exist and they don't move. So you're a deer trying to navigate through a forest, but you're basically wearing a 12-foot wide coat hanger on your face. Every branch is a problem. Every thicket is a trap. You can't run from predators because your antlers snag on literally everything. And you definitely can't sneak anywhere because you sound like someone dragging a shopping cart through a construction site. The Victorians actually thought Megaloceros went extinct because their antlers got so heavy they couldn't lift their heads anymore. Which isn't technically true, but it's spiritually accurate, because the female deer that wanted the bigger racks, well, they led to their entire species going extinct because nobody could move through the trees anymore. And if you can't move through trees, you get eaten. So, bigger rack, not always better. But at least the giant deer had a reason for the massive head decoration, even if it was a pretty bad reason. Some animals decide to make their skulls thick for the sake of it. Stegosaurus was about the size of a large dog, and its entire personality was having a head made of solid bone. We're talking about 3 inches of skull thickness, which doesn't sound that impressive until you realize that's thicker than most people's skulls by a factor of like 10. This dinosaur's head was basically a bowling ball with legs attached, and it used this evolutionary gift to settle every disagreement the same way, which was by running full speed at another Stegosaurus and smashing faces together until somebody gave up. CT scans show the inside of these skulls had all these internal supports and cushioning structures designed specifically for absorbing impacts, which means this animal had spent millions of years evolving into nature's crash test dummy. It worked. Sort of. You could win territory, attract mates, establish dominance, all without getting a concussion because your brain was wrapped in what was essentially organic cement. The problem is that Stegosaurus lived during the late Cretaceous, which was a time when ecosystems were changing pretty fast. And while Stegosaurus was busy perfecting the secret ancient art of concussions, the world was moving on without it. New plant eaters showed up, better teeth, more efficient guts, an actual survival strategy beyond if I hit it really hard with my face, it might not attack me. And Stegosaurus, being quite literally thick-skulled, because it didn't have a big brain, just kept doing its one thing. Even more embarrassingly, it didn't even make it to the asteroid. Most dinosaurs at least got the dignity of dying in a global catastrophe, but Stegosaurus just kind of faded out a few million years early. Probably because when food got scarce or habitats changed, its solution was to headbutt the problem. And you can't really headbutt starvation away. Please, none of you try that. That's not a good idea. It turns out this is not a useful response to environmental stress. You cannot bonk your way out of extinction. But Stegosaurus really tried, and that's almost admirable in how completely pointless it was. Stegosaurus thinks that you should also bonk the subscribe button and the like button, because why not? Being hard-headed works great for winning fights and is absolutely terrible for adapting to literally anything else. At least Stegosaurus got to use its thick skull for something. The next animal on this list spent all of its evolutionary energy growing decorations nobody can even explain. 45 million years ago, there was a mammal called Unititherium that looked like someone who was like a chimpanzee designed a rhino in the dark while they were drunk off too much of the monkey sauce. It was massive, about 2 tons, which put it in the elephant weight class, and it had 6 bony knobs sticking out of its skull in pairs. Just these weird lumps arranged on its forehead like somebody was planning to install horns, but then they gave up halfway through. Scientists still argue about what these bumps were for, and the leading theories are either mating display or absolutely nothing, which should tell you how useful they are. Also, here's a little fun fact about paleontology. When we can't explain something, we usually just give it the label they used it for mating or species recognition. So if you hear that, just take it with a grain of salt always, because we don't really know. And it also had these big saber teeth jutting out of its lower jaw, which sounds cool. I mean, the saber-toothed tiger had those, right? That's gotta be a great invention. That's gotta be a great adaptation in prehistoric times. Well, that would be true until you learn that it is an herbivore. So it is just walking around with steak knives in its mouth trying to eat leaves. For a while, this was fine. The Eocene was basically mammal summer camp. Everybody was trying weird shit just to see what would happen, and Unititherium was out there looking ridiculous and getting away with it because there weren't that many predators big enough to bother it. But evolution kept going, and other mammals started showing up with functional horns, bigger brains, better teeth, and Unititherium was still just vibing with its 6 mystery bumps and a tiny brain. It is actually kind of sad. You look at a Unititherium skull, and it's clear that this animal invested everything into looking weird and nothing into being good at survival. Its brain was tiny for its body size, which wasn't uncommon back then, but it definitely didn't help when competition started heating up. Meanwhile, other herbivores were getting smarter, faster, more efficient, and Unititherium was just standing there like a failed art project. By 37 million years ago, it was gone. It was outcompeted by mammals that focused on practical things instead of collecting head bumps. Fashion always goes out of style. But extinction, that's permanent. Now, if you think 6 useless bumps on your head is bad design, wait until you see what happens when evolution decides your face should be a literal gardening tool. 15 million years ago, there was an elephant relative that had a lower jaw shaped like a snow shovel. And before you ask, yes, this is real, and yes, it's exactly as stupid as it sounds. Platybelodon lived in the swamps of Africa and Asia, and some higher power somewhere in the evolutionary process decided that what this animal really needed was a flat scoop for a mouth with 2 tusks sticking out the front. The name literally means flat shovel tooth because paleontologists looked at this thing and gave up on trying to be creative. It would wade into marshes and use this whole apparatus to scoop up water plants, which worked great as long as there were marshes to wade into. Foreshadowing. And here's the thing, for about 10 million years there were plenty of marshes. The Miocene was basically Swamp City, so Platybelodon could just stand in the muck all day shoveling plants into its face and calling it a career. This is a completely fine survival strategy right up until the moment the world decides to stop being wet. Climate started shifting, things got drier, and all of those nice, comfortable swamps started turning into grasslands. Platybelodon now had a very expensive piece of specialized equipment that only worked in an environment that was rapidly disappearing. You can't shovel grass. Well, you can, but it's not effective and you look like an idiot doing it. Meanwhile, other elephants were developing normal trunks and normal tusks that worked in multiple different environments. which meant they could just walk onto the grasslands and keep eating while Platybilodon was stuck at the last remaining waterhole trying to make its shovel face relevant. By 5 million years ago, it was completely gone, killed by the same climate change that it had zero tools to handle because it spent its entire evolutionary budget on a mouth that only worked in one specific habitat. It put all of its eggs in one basket, and then someone came along and just stomped on the basket. No omelet for you, bye-bye Platybilodon. So that's what happens when you over-specialize for wet environment. But there's another way to go extinct, this time in the ocean, which is to build your entire survival plan around eating the smallest possible food and then watching that food disappear. 360 million years ago, there was a fish the size of a school bus that died because it couldn't figure out how to bite anything. Titanichthys was an armored fish from the Devonian period, and it looked like it should have been terrifying. It was 20 feet long, covered in bone plates, swimming around the ancient oceans, acting like it owned the place. Except there was one small teensy tiny problem, which that its jaw was basically made of paper and it had given up on teeth entirely. This fish looked at the apex predator lifestyle and said, no thanks, I'm gonna eat plankton instead. Its cousin, the Dunkleosteus, had jaws that could bite through armor and crush bone. Titanichthys had a jaw so weak it probably couldn't eat a sandwich. It just swam around with its giant mouth hanging open, filtering tiny organisms out of the water and hoping there would be enough to fuel a body that weighed several tons. For a while, the ocean was full of plankton and everything was fine, but then the late Devonian extinction events happened and the bottom of the food chain collapsed. Plankton populations crashed, which meant every filter feeder in the ocean suddenly had nothing to eat, and Titanichthys was the most specialized filter feeder of them all. It couldn't switch to hunting because it had no weapons. It couldn't eat anything bigger than a grain of rice. It just had to swim around with its mouth open, straining water that was increasingly empty, waiting to starve. Dunkleosteus lasted a bit longer because it could still bite things and at least try to survive. Titanichthys had optimized itself into a corner where the only food it could process was disappearing, and there was no backup plan. The entire species just drifted off into extinction, mouths still hanging open, and what I can only assume was permanent confusion about where all the food went. But at least Titanichthys died in the water where it belonged. The next animal couldn't even manage that because it forgot how to land. Quick question, if you're a flying animal, what's the one ability you probably shouldn't give up? If you said the ability to land safely, congratulations, you're smarter than Nyctosaurus, a pterosaur that decided wings were for flying only and land was somebody else's problem. This thing had a 2-meter wingspan and looked relatively normal for a pterosaur, right up until you notice it has no claws on its wings. Most flying reptiles had little finger claws that they could use to grab onto things or climb around when they weren't in the air. Nyctosaurus deleted that feature entirely, which meant if it ever ended up on the ground, it was basically stuck there like a turtle on its back. But that wasn't even the best or the most funny part, because if you look at the creature, you'll see what's on its head, because the males had this head crest that was longer than their entire body. We are talking about a Y-shaped fork of bone sticking up and back from its skull, possibly with a membrane stretching between the prongs to make it even more absurd. The whole thing was probably for mating display, which would make sense in the same way that peacock tails make sense, except peacocks can still walk, and Nyctosaurus was trying to fly around with a sail on its head while having no ability to take off from the ground if it crashed. This is the creature that bet everything on staying airborne forever, which works great until literally any problem happens. Food gets scarce, too bad, you've already spent all of your energy budget growing a billboard on your face. Bad weather, hope you can fly through a storm with that giant dragon-inducing crest. Need to rest somewhere? Well, better hope it's the water because you're not climbing anything anytime soon. Nyctosaurus went extinct before the asteroid even showed up, which honestly makes sense. When your entire survival strategy is never stop flying and hope nothing goes wrong, something will eventually go wrong. I mean, just look at his freaking crest. How is anything with that big of a crest surviving? You know what's even worse than not being able to land? Being the biggest, strongest thing in your entire forest and still managing to starve to death because you won't eat your vegetables. You're wrong, vegetables, I mean. Gigantopithecus was a 10-foot tall ape that weighed half a ton, and it went extinct 100,000 years ago because it refused to try any new foods. This thing was enormous. It was easily the largest primate that ever existed. It spent about 1 million years living in the forests of Southeast Asia, eating fruit and bamboo, and having basically no predators, because who is gonna mess with a 1,000-pound gorilla? You? No. Me? No. Nothing. That's what. Life was perfect. The forest provided everything it needed, and Gigantopithecus was content to just eat the same stuff forever and not think about backup plans. But then the climate changed and the forest started shrinking. Now, when this happened to other primates, they adapted. Early humans started eating grass seeds, roots, whatever they could find. They got creative. Gigantopithecus looked at the new food options and said, "No thank you, I will have banana and bamboo. I'm just gonna wait here till the fruit trees come back," which they did not, because that is not how climate change works. No banana come back. The forests kept shrinking, turning into grasslands, and Gigantopithecus just stayed in the remaining forest patches, getting hungrier and hungrier. No banana. And here is the thing, it's not even that it couldn't eat other food. It just didn't. Whether that was because its gut wasn't set up for it or because it was behaviorally stubborn, we don't know. But the result was the same. You're a giant ape, you need thousands of calories a day to maintain that body. And you're refusing to eat anything except your favorite snacks of bamboo and banana, which are rapidly running out. Other apes survived by being flexible. Gigantopithecus decided inflexibility was more important than survival, which is definitely a choice you can make. It's just not a choice that leads to your species lasting very long. Yes, the largest ape in history starved because it was a picky eater. Think about that story whenever the person that you're dating is a picky eater. Tell them, hey, do you want our species to go extinct? No? Well, maybe we should pick a damn restaurant. Look, at least starvation is relatively dignified compared to what happened to other Ice Age animals, which is that humans showed up and turned them into furniture. So imagine you're a giant armored mammal. You're built like someone welded steel plates onto a small car. You've got a spiked club on your tail that can shatter bone. And you've survived for thousands of years being basically unkillable. Nothing in South America can touch you. Saber-toothed cats bounce off. Terror birds give up. You are the final boss of the Pleistocene. Then humans show up and immediately realize that, hey, that's a nice mobile home. Doedicurus was the size of a Volkswagen Beetle and covered in armor 2 inches thick, which sounds like the perfect defense system until you meet the one predator that doesn't care about fighting fair. Early humans in South America took one look at this thing and had a collective realization, which was that if they could kill it, they would get hundreds of pounds of meat and a free roof. The shell was literally sturdy enough to use as a shelter. Just flip it over and crawl inside. Archaeological evidence shows humans absolutely did this. By the way, we have found Doedicurus shells with signs of human habitation, which means someone killed one of these things, had a nice barbecue, and then just moved into its corpse like it was a studio apartment. The thing is, Doedicurus couldn't really stop them. It was slow. Its defenses were designed for animals that played by animal rules, and humans just stayed at range throwing spears until it died. This is what happens when your entire survival strategy is passive defense and you run into an enemy that has invented the concept of wait it out and throw a rock at it. All of that armor, all of that evolutionary time spent becoming a walking tank, and just made humans want to kill you more because you came with built-in free housing. And hey, me and you know humans, we get pretty mad when we can't find housing. The invincible beast, done in by the real estate market, just in prehistory. Doedicurus at least had defenses even if they didn't really work. But the next animal had nothing, as it evolved on an island where nothing ever tried to kill it, which was great, right up until something showed up wanting to kill it. The dodo lived on an island and had never seen a predator in its entire evolutionary history, which means when Dutch sailors showed up in 1598, its first instinct was to walk directly towards them to say hello. This went about as well as you would expect. We're talking about a turkey-sized flightless chicken bird that had spent thousands of years on an island with no mammals, no snakes, nothing that wanted to eat it. So it never learned fear. Why would it? Every single thing it had ever encountered was either food, a mate, or a tree. When humans arrived, the dodo's brain did not have the category for dangerous, so it just waddled up to the new sailors like they were their new best friends. And then the sailors did the nice friendly thing of clubbing them to death with sticks, because that's what humans do when presented with slow-moving protein. The name dodo probably comes from a Portuguese word meaning simpleton, and honestly, fair. These birds would apparently just stand there while you grabbed them. They nested on the ground, they didn't run when approached, and when rats and pigs showed up with the humans and started eating their eggs, the dodos didn't even try to guard the nest, because why would you need to guard anything? That is not a concept they had in their little brains. Less than 70 years after humans discovered them, dodos went extinct, which is barely 2 human lifetimes. Yes, we wiped out a species in 70 years that had survived for much, much longer. That's insane. Most species at least get a fighting chance, but the dodos showed up to an extinction event completely unarmed and unaware that there was even a fight happening. The phrase dead as a dodo exists because this bird went extinct so fast and so obviously that it became the poster child for being gone forever. It could not have been more trusting. It could not have been less prepared. Friendliness is great until it isn't. And for the dodo, well, it stopped being great quite immediately. So the dodo walked up to a human and died. But there's an even more pathetic way to go extinct involving humans, which is to hand them your children on a plate every single day and wonder why your species keeps shrinking. Aperonis was the elephant bird of Madagascar. It was 10 feet tall and weighed about half a ton and laid eggs that could feed a family for a week. I am not exaggerating here. These eggs held the volume of about 150 chicken eggs. They were massive. And the birds just left them sitting on the ground in nests because why wouldn't you? They had been doing it for thousands of years and nothing had ever bothered them. Madagascar didn't have any large predators, so elephant birds just laid their giant eggs out in the open and went about their day assuming everything would be fine. But then humans arrived around 500 BC, and humans really like eggs. Imagine you're an early settler on Madagascar. You're walking through the forest and you find a bird egg the size of a football just sitting there. You take it back to camp and it feeds everyone for 3 days. So you go back and get more and more, and the birds keep laying them and you keep taking them. And the elephant birds apparently never figured out that maybe they should hide the eggs or guard them or do literally anything differently. Archaeological sites from this period are full of elephant bird eggshells, which means people were harvesting these things constantly. Every egg taken is one baby that never hatches, and elephant birds didn't have enough babies to make up for that kind of loss. They also probably got hunted directly by humans and their dogs. Plus, there's evidence that chickens brought by settlers might have given them diseases they had never encountered before. By the year 1200, they were gone, wiped out in about 1,000 years, which sounds like a long time until you remember that they had been around for millions of years before that. The largest bird that ever lived, killed by its own eggs being too convenient. It was literally killed by having great macros. If you ever want to get a little bit mad, if early humans hadn't showed up and killed these things, we could be having giant eggs for breakfast and feeding the entire world with those. Imagine if we replaced little chickens with giant chickens. You know how much food that would be if there's a whole industry around these birds? But you have early humans to blame for literally taking so much of a good thing until it's gone. So we've covered prey animals that died in stupid ways, but what about predators? Well, it turns out being big and scary doesn't help when your prey disappears and the new apex predator has invented fire. 50,000 years ago, Australia had a 20-foot venomous lizard, and it went extinct because it couldn't figure out how to deal with small, hairless, ugly apes that kept burning down its house. Megalania was the biggest monitor lizard that ever lived. It weighed over 1,000 pounds, and it was the top predator in Pleistocene Australia. It ate giant wombats and huge kangaroos and probably anything else that moved slow enough to catch. For thousands of years, it was the king of the food chain, and then 2 things happened at basically the same time, which were that the climate started drying out and humans showed up. The drying climate meant less vegetation, which meant fewer giant herbivores, which meant less food for Megalania. That's already bad, but then you had humans that were hunting those same herbivores and also deliberately setting fires to flush out game, and suddenly the whole ecosystem falls apart. Megalania had size, strength, venom, claws, everything you would think an apex predator needs. But none of that matters when your prey is gone and the creatures that took your prey can throw spears from a distance you can't reach. You can't ambush something that's using coordinated fire drive hunting tactics. You can't outcompete something that shares food with its whole tribe and plans ahead. And the really pathetic part is that Megalania was a reptile, which means it had slow reproduction. If something kills off half your population, you cannot just bounce back quickly. Meanwhile, humans reproduce fast, and they just keep spreading and hunting and burning. And Megalania's numbers dropped and kept dropping until there weren't any left. By 40,000 years ago, it was over. The mightiest reptile in Australia lost to climate change and some guy with a pointy stick and basic understanding of teamwork. Not exactly a hero's ending, more like a death by 1,000 cuts situation, except the cuts were spears and fire. So what is the common thread here? Every single one of these animals went extinct for a reason that was in hindsight completely avoidable. Megaloceros didn't need antlers that big. Stegosaurus didn't need to invest everything into headbutting. Platybelodon could have developed a mouth that worked in multiple environments, and so on and so on. You get the idea. But none of them did. The thing about evolution is that it's not intelligent design. It is just trial and error stretched out over millions of years. What works in one environment becomes a death sentence in another. What makes you successful today can kill you tomorrow if conditions change. These creatures weren't stupid in any real sense. They were just extremely specialized for reasons they didn't really need to be at the time. And when the world shifted, they just didn't have the time to adjust. The real question is, what are we doing right now that's going to look just as dumb 1,000 years from now? What's our version of 12-foot antlers, or refusing to eat new foods, or trusting everything that walks up to us? Well, for one, the climate's changing faster than most species can adapt, which is basically the same problem that most species that have went extinct have faced. The difference is that we can see it coming, and we're still arguing about whether it's even a real thing or not, which honestly might be more stupid than a dinosaur is trying to butt heads. Evolution does not care about fairness. It doesn't care if you were the biggest or the strongest or the best one at your specific thing. It only cares if you can survive what comes next. Well, in 1,000 years, when the next species makes their own YouTube, you might just end up in this video. If you enjoyed watching this video and want to know anything more about extinct animals, make sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more content just like this. Make sure to also hit the hype button, and if you want to watch more of our videos, you can click the ones on your screen right now.